Hey everyone, tonight we start with something gritty, grand, and completely unforgiving. Life in the Roman Empire, not as a senator, not as an emperor. No gold crowns, no marble baths. Tonight, you're not Julius Caesar, you're just you. Dropped unprepared into a world of sandals, sewage, and government-sanctioned crucifixion. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to the sound of shouting, chickens, and a crying baby somewhere nearby. Congratulations, Zuv. Just woken up in a Roman insula, the ancient version of an apartment block. Think of it as a tall, unstable fire trap, held together by dust, hope, and poor construction. You're probably living on the 3rd or 4th floor, which is bad news. The higher the floor, the poorer the resident and the more likely your ceiling will collapse when someone spills olive oil upstairs. Your room is tiny, about the size of a walk-in closet with stone walls. There's sweat during summer and freeze in winter. No real window, just a small hole that lets in air, smoke, and the odd pigeon. Your mattress is stuffed with straw and lice. The blanket smells of damp wool and regret. There's no furniture, no decorations, and definitely no kitchen. Cooking indoors is banned. One stray flame could burn the whole place down, and fire safety isn't a thing yet. Your belongings, a clay cup, a worn-out tunic, and maybe a wooden comb if you're lucky. There's no toilet, not in your room or even your building. Your chamber pot sits quietly in the corner, judging you. You'll need to carry it down narrow, shaky stairs and dump it into the street gutter. Hopefully, without slipping and joining the morning mess yourself. And the walls, paper thin. You can hear your neighbor praying, coughing, arguing with his wife, and unfortunately, not arguing with her. If you catch my meaning, the air is thick with smoke, mold, and the sharp scent of unwashed people. Someone downstairs is baking bread, but it's not for you. Street vendors shout prices for figs and fish guts. A centurion yells orders at someone who's probably already bleeding. You haven't even stepped outside yet, and you're sweating, itchy, and probably breathing in lead dust from the plumbing. Welcome to a Roman morning. You're not an emperor. You're not a gladiator. You're just one more tired soul in a packed tenement, trying not to fall down the stairs or upset a minor god before lunch. And you've still got 23 hours left to go. Now that you've survived the crooked stairs of your insula, it's time to handle the next urgent task. Your bladder. There's no bathroom in your home. No sink. No flush. Not even a bucket with any sense of dignity. So you shuffle down the street chamber pot in one hand, modesty in the other, toward the nearest latrina, Rome's public restroom. And public is being generous. It's more like a social club. For strangers who don't mind eye contact during private moments, you arrive and see a long stone bench with holes cut into it. Underneath, a shallow stream carries away the city's collective shame. You sit if you're brave and hope the person next to you doesn't want to chat. Privacy doesn't exist. Doors, not a chance. People treat the place like a town square with extra ricos. Merchants talk grain prices while squatting. A retired soldier complains about his sight. Meanwhile, you're just trying not to look straight ahead, where someone is chewing olives and refusing to blink. Then comes the real test. A shared sponge on a stick, kept in a bucket of vinegar or salt water. In theory, you rinse it before use. In practice, well, the sponge has a long, disturbing history. You wipe carefully and hope the vinegar did its job. If you're lucky, you brought your own rag. If you're wealthy, maybe moss. But most likely, you used what everyone else did. And now carry the quiet shame of communal hygiene. And if you think you can skip all this by going in an alley, don't. Public urination is illegal. Fines are real. And Roman law enforcement doesn't do gentle warnings. When you're done, you wash your hands. Actually, no, you don't. There's no soap, no running water, just a quick splash from a shared basin that's seen more fingers than a handshake contest. You leave the latrina feeling lighter and a little more dead inside. But that's Rome. Now it's time for breakfast, if you can call it that. Impressive. You've done your business and managed not to fall into a gutter or get fined. Now comes the first meal of the day. Not that the Romans saw it as important. It's more like a brief stop before the day's labor and hardship. Welcome to the Intaculum, the Roman version of breakfast. It consists of two main things: dry bread and watered down wine. Sometimes cheese, sometimes olives. Mostly just low expectations. Forget about coffee. The Romans didn't have it. No eggs, no bacon, no pancakes. Definitely no oat milk. Breakfast wasn't meant to satisfy it, was meant to keep you going. Your bread is likely Panis, rusticusa rough, dense loaf baked yesterday, or the day before, chewy, gritty, and tough enough to double as a weapon. The wine, watered down because even they knew that getting drunk at sunrise was a bad idea. Unless, of course, you were a senator. There's still no kitchen in your building. So, you eat this meal standing on the street or squatting beside a fountain with other equally unenthusiastic citizens, chewing on bread that tastes like flavorless tree bark. If you're really lucky enough to have a bit of oil, or a smear of garamone, famously salty, fermented fish, sauce, you've just added a pungent smell to an already depressing meal. If you were wealthy, maybe you'd get some fruit or honey. But you're not. You're just an ordinary Roman, wealthy enough to avoid slavery, poor enough to envy your neighbor's cracked jug of goat milk. Occasionally, vendors pass by selling warm chickpea fritters or honeyed pastries. And for a second, you feel hopeful. But then you remember your coin pouch is emptier than a gladiator's mercy. So, you chew your bread and pretend it's cake. This is how your day begins. With carbs, slight dehydration, and the slow realization that you'll be walking 7 miles in Roman sandals, with nothing in your stomach but crumbs and a leftover buzz from last night's diluted wine. And it doesn't get better, because now it's time for work. After your hearty meal of bread and low expectations, you head out to face the Roman workday. Let's be honest, unless you're a senator, a poet with a wealthy sponsor, or someone who inherited land from a conveniently deceased uncle, you are working, and not lightly. Maybe you're a laborer, porter, potter, bricklayer, or street cleaner. If your luck is worse, you're in the sewers. Rome needs many things: roads, aqueducts, temples, and bathhouses, and someone has to build them. That someone is you, with bare hands, under the sun, in sandals that offer all the support of a damp leaf. The workday starts early, very early. The sun has barely risen, and the foreman is already shouting in Latin and waving a stick. If you're late, your pay is doctor or worse. You're beaten, shamed, or fired, which in Roman terms means you starve. But with dignity, you dig with a splintered shovel, carry bricks on your back, and haul water from a cistern that smells like old socks and crushed dreams. Your tools are basic. No gloves, no helmets, just sweat, dust, and the constant risk of a misstep that could break your back and end your career in one moment. And if you're a craftsman, good luck. You're competing with hundreds of others selling the same clay pots, sandals, or tunics. Undercutting prices is normal, and quality docenti matter much, especially if a richer client decides he docenti like how you look. Even higher status jobs like messenger, accountant, or teacher aren't glamorous. You're either running through Rome's chaotic streets with scrolls under your arm, writing numbers for someone who won't remember your name, or trying to teach Latin to senators, children who already believe they're divine. Women are working tools, pinning, weaving, selling vegetables, or running market stalls. Plus, raising children, managing the home, and doing their best to survive childbirth. Multitasking before the word existed. After all this, you might get a short break for lunch. That is, if your supervisor isn't in a bad mood or trying to impress a visiting prefect. So yes, you work, or you don't survive. Rome may be eternal, but your spine isn't. You've made it through the morning without fainting or being flogged. Now, it's time to navigate the ancient De Roma Street, a chaotic, crowded maze seemingly designed by someone with no concern for personal space or public health. Rats, flies, stray dogs, livestock, beggars, vendors shouting in 6 different languages, kids running everywhere. Picture this: it's midday, the city's noisy, and the street is full of life, not in a poetic sense, in a literal one, and pickpockets pretending to help the elderly while stealing your money pouch. It's like Times Square. Times Square had no plumbing, and everyone was carrying a goat. Let's talk infrastructure. Roman roads were engineering wonders: straight, well-paved, and usually covered in a mix of urine, spilled wine, vomit, animal waste, and the leftovers of last night's garum sauce. The center of the road works as an open sewer. Step off the raised sidewalk without checking, and congratulations, you've just dipped your sandal in the city's shared misery. Carts rattle by with no speed limits, no crosswalks, and no patience. They don't stop for pedestrians. In fact, Roman law banned heavy carts during daytime, which means drivers race through at night, like chariot racers on a deadline. No brakes, no warnings. If the wheels don't get you, someone's elbow, a basket, or a loud fish vendor might. The air is thick with smoke from cooking fires, incense from temples, and the lingering odor of public toilets, and dead animals. Sometimes people just leave them. If a dog dies in the forum, someone might toss a cloth over it and keep walking. Then there are public events: random fights, surprise protests, or a politician's parade that blocks everything for hours, while a brass band blares off-key music in your face. So yes, Roman streets are full of life and danger. Slip on a fig, get hit by a cart, or accidentally insult a nobleman's pet monkey, and your day could end faster than Caesar's did on the Ides of March. You live in Rome, a city famous for its aqueducts, brilliant structures that carry fresh water from the hills straight into the city, and all you wanted was to buy lentils. You're hot, dusty, and in desperate need of something cold. The good news, the bad news, that water isn't for you. Unless you're rich enough to live in a domus with your own private fountain, you're sharing it with thousands of your closest neighbors, most of whom are coughing, sneezing, and not washing their hands. Your options: public fountains, where people fill jars, wash their feet, and sometimes dunk kids for fun or cleanliness. And by cleanliness, we mean the hopeful kind. If you want a proper wash, the best choice is the Rome's public bath. They're everywhere, and everyone uses them. Sounds civilized, but there's a catch. The water cycles through several pools, with no soap, no chemicals, and very little shame. You're sitting in warm water with a dozen other men, none of whom believe in personal boundaries. The conversations are loud, political, and sometimes very awkward. One man might try to sell you socks, while another cleans his ears with a stick. And the water, it's been through everyone. If you came here to get clean, you'll leave feeling like you soaked in bacteria with a touch of herbs. Also, fun fact, the plumbing often uses lead pipes. Yes, lead. The Romans loved engineering, but chemistry wasn't their strength. Over time, that handy plumbing can lead to problems like anemia, gout, infertility, and, if you're especially unlucky, madness. Want to drink something safer? Try wine. Seriously. Water is often seen as unsafe, especially in poorer neighborhoods, where contamination from toilets and street runoff is common. That's why wine is diluted and drunk throughout the day by men, women, and even children, because sometimes the only way to get through life in a crumbling empire ... is with a mild buzz. So yes, Rome brought water into the city long before most of the world even knew what a pipe was. But for the average person, it's still a risk every time you drink, bathe, or rinse your feet. Enjoy your aqueducts, just don't trust them. Welcome to the Roman Empire, where pain isn't just a risk, it's the constant background noise of your daily life. There's no ice, no painkillers. You grit your teeth and carry on until it either heals badly or falls off. Stub your toe, break a bone, wrap it in a dirty cloth and try not to move. Get a splinter. Good luck. That's how infections begin and how your story might end. Roman life doesn't offer much comfort. No ergonomic tools. No soft chairs. No idea of taking breaks. If you're a laborer, you're lifting bricks with a hernia and a silent wish. If you're a soldier, you're walking 20 miles a day with bleeding feet and a scorpion bite. If you're a woman in labor, welcome to pain. Your midwife might have a chantand, not much else. Every part of your body is one wrong step away from an injury or becoming someone else's warning story. Unless you live near a temple with a skilled priest, your best options are homemade ointments, herbal smoke, or ignoring the problem until it goes away. Or you do. There's no such thing as anesthesia. Imagine a blacksmith. Now, imagine your mouth. That's the situation. Surgery is done while you're fully awake, biting into a piece of wood. Suffering in silence was considered noble. Dislocated shoulder. A man named Marcus who once watched someone else try it will snap it back into place. Dental work. If you're enslaved or poor, people don't even pretend to care. You could be bleeding in the street, and the most you'll hear is, "Don't stain the mosaic." Even wealthy Romans accepted pain as a sign of strength. Stoicism was the popular philosophy. If you cried about a broken arm, you weren't just hurting, you were weak. Real Romans endured quietly, and maybe wrote a poem about it. So yes, pain is always nearby, and it usually shows up without warning, without help, and without pity. On that encouraging note, let's talk about what happens when you actually visit a Roman doctor. Let us say you re-hurt maybe. It is an infected blister from yesterday's job. Or maybe you shaved with a bronze blade and now your chin looks like a gladiator practice arena. Either way, it's time to seek medical care, which, in ancient Rome, is less about healing and more about surviving the treatment. Let's start with the basics. Roman medicine is a mix of Greek ideas, mystical guesses, and a surprising amount of plants. The main theory: the body is ruled by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Feeling sick, one of them is off. The solution: drains something. So your doctor who might also cut hair riches for the leeches, or a blade, because bloodletting is the default fix for everything from headaches to bad moods. Got a cough? Let's open a vein. Feeling low? Just drain some sadness from your arm. Surgery? Yes, it existed. Roman doctors had scalpels, forceps, even bone drills. What they didn't have was anesthesia. You stayed awake the whole time, gripping a wooden table while a man in a stained toga dug into your skin with the confidence of someone who once read about it on a scroll. Antiseptics? Not really. They might clean a wound with wine or vinegar, which helps, but also feels like punishment from the gods. Infection was common. So was death. Prescriptions were unpredictable. Time for dinner. Just don't expect comfort food. You might be given honey, garlic, crushed beetles, or a paste made from herbs, ashes, and a very specific kind of animal dung. If things get worse, you're told to sleep in a temple, pray to Asclepius, and hope a dream reveals your cure. If that fails, your doctor shrugs, your family lights a candle, and your neighbors start whispering about what kind of omen your death might be. Not that Romans didn't care about health, they just had figured out what actually helped and what made things worse, faster. So next time you sneeze, be thankful for modern antibiotics and that your recovery doesn't begin with blood loss. After a long day of sweating, bleeding, and avoiding carts, you're starving, or, as the Romans called it, let's start with what's missing. No pizza, no pasta, no tomatoes, potatoes, chocolate, sugar, or coffee. None of those things have been discovered or brought in yet. This isn't Italian food, it's pre-Italy survival. You sit down to a wooden bowl of something warm and brown. It's probably pools, a porridge made from spelt beans, or lentils. It tastes like soggy gravel with a hint of herb if you're lucky. If you're not, It just tastes like soggy gravel. Protein is rare unless you've caught, trapped, or fished it yourself. Meat is expensive, and even when you get some, it's often not fresh. Without refrigeration, food is preserved by heavy salting, smoking, or soaking it in garum, a fermented fish sauce. It smells like Dead Sea and stings the nose. Feeling festive, there might be boiled vegetables, hard cheese, or a fig. Wealth the Romans ate. Unusual dishes like roasted flamingo, stuffed dormice, or jellyfish with vinegar meals. They mainly said, I'm rich and don't care about flavor. Your wine is always watered down. Drinking it straight is seen as uncivilized. But don't worry, the water it's mixed with probably isn't clean either. You're just picking how fast you want to get sick. Dessert, maybe dried fruit, maybe nuts, or maybe you're refasting because it is a feast day for a god who doesn't approve of overeating. Either way, you're not ending the night with tiramisu. There are no napkins. You wipe your hands on a cloth shared with 10 others, or on your tunic, and pretend it's fine. By the end of dinner, your stomach is full but uneasy, and your breath smells like garlic, wine, and a bit of regret, but at least you're fed. Now all you have to do is get through Roman nightlife. And no, it's not relaxing. After a long day of dirt, exhaustion, and fish sauce, you might want a little distraction. Something to take your mind off the crumbling apartment and open sewer. Good news. You're in Rome, where entertainment is everywhere. Bad news. Most of it is disturbing. Let us start with the big one. The Colosseum, Rome's engineering marvel, an emotional black hole. Crowds gather here to watch people fight to the death. Wild animals eat criminals, and occasionally full naval battles reenacted with real water and actual drowning. It's free to attend, which sounds generous, until you realize it's free because the state wants you distracted while the Senate quietly raises taxes and annexes Armenia. You sit packed among sweaty strangers, cheering as someone loses a limb. There's blood, sand, and sometimes public executions with extra flair. You're clapping. You're not even sure why. Feeling sensitive. Try the theater. Head to the amphitheater for a play maybe. A tragedy in Latin you barely follow. Or a comedy where the punchline involves someone pretending to insult Jupiter with a sausage. Subtlety was never Rome's strength. Feeling energetic. Visit the Circus Maximus. Chariot races are fast, exciting, and usually deadly. There are no barriers, no safety gear, and a lot of shouting. Crashes are common and people love them. The crowd comes for the violence and the betting. Just don't cheer for the wrong team unless you're ready to fight your way home. There's also street entertainment, fire breathers, acrobats, musicians, scammers. Wait 5 minutes, someone new will start yelling, and the occasional barefoot philosopher shouting about life. Don't like the show, but beneath all of this is a strange brilliance. Rome didn't just distract its people, overwhelm them into forgetting how difficult life was. It turned spectacle into a tool, and if that didn't work, well, there was always more wine. Now, let's take a walk through Roman justice. Spoiler, it's not very reassuring. You've made it through work, dinner, and a gladiator, getting stabbed for applause. You might think that if you just keep quiet, the law will protect you. That's a sweet thought. In Rome, the law doesn't protect, it reminds. It reminds you that you're small, replaceable, and that mercy is something saved for statues of First of all, your legal status matters. If you're a citizen, you have rights on paper. The wealthier side brings witnesses, bribes, and dramatic displays. You bring your tunic and a sense of dread. Crying on cue might help, not just for Jesus, but for rebels, thieves, and anyone the state wants to make an example of. If you have no powerful friends, pray to Jupiter and hope the magistrate isn't hung over. The vigils are Rome's version of police and firefighters, underpaid, overworked, and often corrupt. Because you're not just obeying manure, living under Jupiter's watch. If you're mugged, they might ignore it. If you bribe them, they might help you mug someone else. You can't be flogged in public unless someone powerful gets irritated. Liars may have their tongues pierced. Fraud, Public whipping or exile if you're lucky. Insult the emperor. That's not jail time. That's death, and often a creative one. Slaves. They're considered property. If a slave kills their master, even if the master deserved it, every slave in the household might be put to death. It's meant to send a message. Don't even think about it, and you're supposed to get a proper trial. If you're not a citizen, justice often comes as a punch, a branding iron, or a quick execution outside the city gates. If you're accused of a crime, don't expect a calm talk with a lawyer. Trials are public shows. Punishments are meant not just to hurt, but to scare others. Thieves can be branded or have their hands crushed. Some crimes demand public punishment, ideally in front of a crowd that cheers louder than they did at that morning's beheading. Crucifixion is common, slow, painful, and humiliating. And remember, law enforcement isn't there to protect you. So yes, Rome has laws carved in stone, recited in forums, but they serve power, not fairness. Now, let's talk about religion. After dodging crime and punishment, maybe you hope religion brings some peace or personal comfort. Not in Rome. Religion here isn't private, it's public, a constant mix of incense and duty that surrounds your daily life. You don't choose your gods, they're assigned to you. And there are many you attend out of respect, but also fear. If the gods aren't pleased, they'll strike back with drought, disease, or a ruined harvest. There's a god for everything. Door, hinges, sewers, boundaries, even mildew. You can't walk a few steps without passing a shrine. If you don't stop to bow, light a candle, or say a prayer, you're not just being rude, you're asking for trouble. Maybe not today, but someday. And when your roof collapses, everyone will say, "Ah, he skipped the Saturnalia offering." Just do it right, on time, and in public. At the top are the senator's wealthy landowners with purple striped togas. Think of them as a boss, godfather, and landlord all in one. Below them are the equestrians, the business elite. Then come the plebeians, the lower and middle classes. You wait in line, praise his haircut, maybe compliment his son's toga, then ask for help, usually money, food, or a recommendation. If he's generous, he might toss you a coin or let you carry his litter through the forum. Below them are freed slaves, foreigners, and the guy who once insulted a statue of Augustus. One poor harvest, one missed ritual, or one jealous rival, and it can all fall apart. You won't even see the knife coming, and smile while sacrificing that goat. But night in Rome, docent teeming peace, it just changes from loud and chaotic to dark and dangerous. You must speak properly, choose your friends wisely, and whatever you do, don't seem too ambitious. It makes people uneasy. In reality, they're underpaid, overworked, and often asleep on the job. Some are brave, most can be bribed, and all are outnumbered. Criminals know this. Thieves, muggers, and the occasional bored ex-gladiator roam the streets, looking for easy targets. If you're walking home alone, you are the target. That's only for the wealthy, the armed, or the extremely lucky. It doesn't matter who you are unless you're armed, fast, or invisible. You're vulnerable. Think again. Rome doesn't sleep. It changes. It becomes darker, louder, and more dangerous. The city stays awakened. It prowls. Networking is a kind of battle, and gossip is valuable. If you have to go out after dark, you do so by instinct and parade, never alone. And men shouting bad poetry about Mars and women they'll never impress. Fights break out. Dice games end in blood. Sometimes a noble, in a bad mood, sends a slave to settle an old score. Don't carry anything valuable. Don't make eye contact. If you're a woman walking alone, good luck. Rome isn't kind to unaccompanied females after dark. The streets belong to the desperate, the careless, and the dangerously bored. And avoid getting caught between two drunk gladiators, arguing over a missing sandal. Those tall, unstable apartment buildings stay insulated, made of wood and wishful thinking. Cooking after dark is illegal for this reason, but rules mean little to a hungry tenant. Drunken parties echo through the streets, Religious processions pass by with drums and shouting. If a senator's mistress is angry, everyone in a 3-block radius hears about it. One knocked over lamp and a whole block could burn in hours. The Great Fire of 64 CE didn't start on its own, but once it began, it spread like a storm. Roman buildings, especially the tall, wooden insulae, where the poor live are like kindling. A single cooking flame or lamp can turn them into ashes. There's no proper fire service. The vigils serve as firefighters, night watchmen, and often poorly paid janitors. They carry buckets and hope for the best. If your home burns, you might be rescued or just end up as a warning in tomorrow's gossip. One wrong comment at a banquet can ruin your career. Then you'll realize there's no real evacuation plan. You grab your tunic, your chamber pot, maybe your dignity, and race down a collapsing staircase. The right marriage might save your entire family line, but you need to be careful. Love is for poets. In Rome, people marry for alliances and access to property. People get by with moonlight, memory, and blind luck to guide them through the winding streets. If you fall, no one will help. They might just steal your sandals. Religious festivals fill the calendar dozens each year. On those days, business stops, animals are sacrificed, and the air smells like roasted bulls and whetstone. Now, emperor worship. The government expects you to treat the emperor as a living god. Surely, things quiet down at night, right? Not in Rome. Now comes the hardest part. The social letter, a finely tuned system, where every word, gesture, and even your sandals can affect your future. Burn incense at his altar. Sing his praises and don't roll your eyes during a victory parade. That's close to treason. In Rome, suspicion is like blood in the water. And if you belong to a foreign cult, you'd better hide it unless it's approved by the state. Rome only likes new gods if they bring wine, taxes, or troops. If you don't join public ceremonies, if you stay quiet during the or skip tossing grain into the temple, fire you may be called impious, unfaithful, or worst of all, suspicious. Religion in Rome isn't about belief, it's about ritual. You don't need to feel anything. Speaking of appearances, let's talk about Roman ambition. You've honored the gods, avoided court, and survived a public bath without catching a mythical disease. Roman society is a ladder but slippery and sharp. Want to rise in rank? You'll need a patrona, powerful person who gives you protection in exchange for loyalty, favors, and votes. Each morning, you visit your patron's home for the salutatio. Congratulations, you're now connected. But now everything you do is watched. Your clothes must be clean, not stylish, just clean. If you rise too fast, others will work to bring you back down socially or even physically. Even if you climb the social ladder, don't get too comfortable. Now the sun is setting. As the sun slips behind the rooftops, you might think, finally, maybe I can rest. Let's start with lighting. There isn't much unless you're wealthy enough to burn oil lamps all night, and most aren't the vigils. Rome's night watch are meant to stop fires and crime. Then there's fire Rome's most feared nighttime threat. You might believe your building is safe until you smell smoke at midnight, and if it's not fire or thieves, it's noise. Sleep in ancient Rome is rare. Silence doesn't exist, and safety. But morning is almost here. You just need to survive the night and then do it all again. The sun sets on Rome, and with it, you might hope for a moment of peace, a breeze, a quiet meal, maybe even rest. Let's go back to fire. Then there are the thieves, pickpockets, and cutpursers who treat the moonlight like a hunting permit. Rome's streets are narrow and dark. Torches are expensive. Speaking of drinking, Rome's nightlife is loud. Taverns spill out into the streets with cheap wine, rough music. If someone gets attacked in the street, you keep to the shadows and pretend you didn't see it. Trying to sleep isn't much better. Your insula creaks like it's thinking of collapsing. Rats scratch behind the walls. Your neighbor coughs like a dying goat. Somewhere nearby, someone is screaming, either from passion, violence, or both. You press your face into a warm pillow and pray to Mercury for quiet. But in Rome, There is no silence. Not for you, because even the darkness in the Roman Empire is loud, and when morning comes, you'll have to do it all again. You woke up in a crumbling apartment, braved public toilets, chariot traffic, gladiator blood, lead pipes, leeches, religious parades, burning rooftops, and lentils soaked in fermented fish sauce. You honored gods you barely understood, followed laws that didn't protect you, and slept through riots, rats, and the occasional public execution. You're dirty, exhausted, possibly sick, and still a little disturbed by the communal sponge. And it's only been one day. Would you survive another? Honestly, no. Most modern people without air conditioners, antibiotics, and 5-minute deliverers wouldn't. Last past lunchtime, you'd quit before the second round of They expanded across continents, created legal systems, studied philosophy, mapped the stars, performed surgeries, and invented concrete that still holds up better than many modern buildings. You'd trade all your coins for a hot shower and a chair with a back, and that's fine. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it and maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone once walked those same filthy streets, helping to build a world that lets you sit here today clean, safe, and mildly horrified. They're architecture-inspired. Cathedrals, parliaments, and college buildings. You have royal blood, a name that sounds legendary. Rhodogenon, more importantly. You live in a world where your family spends more time fighting rebels than hosting dinners. Her father, wasn't he? A ceremonial king. He expanded Parthia from a remote frontier into a growing empire that would eventually rival Rome. For the average Romanot, the emperors, or the wealthy life was a daily struggle. And yet, they endured. They adapted. They had no choice. Their political ideas As a young woman, Rhodogenon would have seen envoys argue, generals draw battle plans, and scribes struggle to track loyalty. It was built on sweat, fear, ambition, and survival layer by layer, person by person, century by bloody century. A public sign that her personal dignity was tied to the empire's future. Every time someone saw her messy, dust-covered hair, they were reminded, this isn't over until we win. She represented Parthian, strength not thrones, but grit, dust, and determination. And yet, the Romans did it for centuries. Because, and here's the incredible part, Rome, in the middle of all the chaos, worked. She carried the expectation that she'd either marry a king or act like one. Gone were any courtly touches. Her hair, famously untouched, became a symbol in itself, hanging like a banner of wartime determination. They expected hesitation not. A battle-hardened woman charging through dust, with purpose in her stride. In a culture obsessed with appearances, she turned hers into a weapon. Sitting on the sidelines while cities burned wasn't her style. They had expected a general or maybe a polite envoy. They assumed something unnatural must be going on, but there was no magic, only discipline and resolve. Instead, they got a determined, unwashed woman riding toward them with steel in her eyes and no time for hair care. And where she was serious, in camps and taverns, soldiers joked that the enemy feared not Parthian swords, but the possibility that Rhodogenon would never wash again. And truthfully, they weren't entirely wrong. Some ruled cities, others shaped dynasties, and she was real, and she had a plan. Even enemy soldiers had heard of the woman who won't wash. Some claimed her hair had turned to iron. Others said she hadn't slept in weeks. The stories piled up like siege towers. The rebel leaders had stockpiled supplies, lined the walls with archers, and reinforced the gates with the smug confidence of those who believed they could hold out forever. She didn't stay behind the lines. She led from the front, hands dirty, determination under her helmet. By the third month, it had tangled into ropes full of dust, sweat, and whispered battlefield prayers. But that only made her more intimidating to her enemies and more honored by her own troops. Just cavalry, resolve, and the burden of an empire that needed her to end the rebellion. And eventually, she made a vow that would become legend. She would not wash or comb her hair until a rebellion was crushed. Somehow, they built cities, roads, aqueducts, libraries, temples, and arenas. She used classic Parthian strategies: mobility, feigned retreats, and hit-and-run attacks. Her troops would appear at the edge of a rebel city, vanish, then return the next day from an unexpected angle. They developed institutions that shaped Europe and much of the world for over 2,000 years. Latin became the foundation of many languages. But it came at a cost, because Rome wasn't built on gold. That's why it lasted. You'd be begging for modern plumbing and allergy pills by mid-of. Now, imagine being a Parthian princess in the 2nd century BCE. Rhodogon wasn't born into a life of luxury. She grew up around horses, politics, and the constant threat of poisoned food. But growth brings problems, rebellions, betrayals, and neighbors who refuse to accept that your army now owns their land. She didn't just learn manners and fashion, she learned strategy, leadership, and how to wear armor that didn't clash with jewelry. Parthian women, though not always in the spotlight, were no strangers to power. And yes, she did win, but that part comes later. At this stage, Rhodogon was already known. She wasn't just royal. She was a symbol of Parthian identity. While other royal women were being pampered, Rhodogon was likely studying military reports and court politics. She had little time for vanity. Spoiler, it took some time. But this wasn't about appearances. It was a statement, and it worked. To her soldiers, she wasn't just a princess, she was a commander sacrificing comfort for the cause. Meanwhile, the rebels likely didn't know what to think. When Rhodogon left the capital, she wasn't leading a fancy procession. No rose petals. She looked the part, too. The campaign wasn't quick. It wasn't a single siege resolved by gold or threats. The rebel cities were well defended and confident. But Rhodogon didn't falter. Her instincts for command were sharp, maybe even sharper than many of the men who had led before her. Reports suggest her soldiers respected her, not just as a symbol, but as a strategist. And as the weeks went on, so did her hair. Rebels began calling her the Witch Queen. Not because she used magic, but because no noble woman should still be in the field, refusing to bathe. By the time her army surrounded the final rebel city, her reputation had grown faster than the rebellion itself. The last rebel stronghold stood ahead. A fortified city, said to be impossible to breach. That was their mistake. By then, Rhodogon's story had traveled beyond the empire. But Rhodogon wasn't a legend. Rather than attack recklessly, she chose a slower strategy, a siege designed to wear the rebels down. She cut off supply routes, intercepted messages, and poisoned wells. The rebels expected a sword fight. Instead, she used hunger and time as weapons. She camped with her soldiers just outside the city. She ate the same meals, stale bread, lukewarm wine. She inspected armor, led patrols, and still refused to touch a comb. Her vow had become sacred. No one joked about it anymore. It had become a living reminder of Parthian pride that their suffering had meaning. Each tangled strand reminded them, we're still fighting. Inside the city, morale crumbled. The rebels had hoped to demoralize the enemy by resisting. Instead, they began to fall apart. Their leaders argued. Food ran low. Rumors of desertion spread like cracks in stone. Then came the turning point. A small gate guarded for just 1 hour was discovered by one of Rhodogon's scouts. That night, under cover of wind and darkness, her forces slipped in and opened the main gates from inside. By morning, the city was hers. Rhodogon, face streaked with sweat and ash, stood at the top of the walls and bathed, victorious and utterly commanding. The victory wasn't announced with music or celebration. It was declared with water. After months of fighting, dust, and exhaustion, she stood before her army not in royal robes, but in the same armor she had worn since the beginning. Her armor was dented, her face weathered, and her hair knotted and filthy hung behind her, like a banner of grit and legend. But the vow was fulfilled. Every rebel city had surrendered. Every traitor was defeated. And now, at last, she could do something no one had dared rush. She could wash her hair. According to later accounts and oral traditions, Rhodogon didn't return to a royal chamber. Instead, she summoned her servants to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers, the ones who had fought beside her, to witness the moment. Water was brought, oils warmed, combs taken from storage like sacred tools. And there, under open sky, the warrior princess of Parthia began to clean away the months of war. Every knot removed was like reclaiming a city. Every rinse of water washed rebellion back into the earth, as though even the land was being healed. Some say she cried, others say she laughed, but no one doubted the silence that fell over the troops. Battle-hardened men, scarred and sunburned, stood still as Rhodagun emerged, transformed. No crown was needed. She didn't need a crown. The dust had become her diadem. The act of not washing had become more meaningful than any jewel. In that moment, Parthia didn't just have a princess. It had a symbol. Rhodagun could have returned to court in triumph, let the scribes write flattering odes, and allowed nobles to shower her with praise. But she didn't rush back to comfort. She stayed with her soldiers a little longer. She ate with them. She listened. She knew her legacy was just beginning, but she didn't want it built on luxury. She wanted it built on memory. After the Nalthamis, hair-washing Rhodagun could have ridden straight to the capital, banners raised, with enough propaganda to last a generation. But she didn't. Instead, she took the long road, home, visiting each city she had retaken one by one. She walked their streets, checked their defenses, and made sure no sparks of rebellion remained beneath the ashes. This wasn't just tradition, it was strategy. Rhodagun understood the risks of victory, how quickly success can turn into complacency. Empires rarely fall from defeat alone. They crumble when they forget why they fought. She wanted both loyalists and former rebels to understand that Parthian strength wasn't just cavalry or silver, it was found in presence, in a leader who chose discipline over ease and earned loyalty by example, not command. And loyalty she earned. Everywhere she went, people gathered not to admire a royal title, but to witness her, polished, unadorned, but real. She didn't bring fear. She brought responsibility. She asked questions, heard complaints, paid for supplies out of her own war fund. She rewarded loyalty and offered careful, limited forgiveness to those who repented. By the time she arrived at court, her return had already become legend. Scribes rushed to write her story. Artists debated how to capture her battle-worn and wild-haired or transformed and radiant. Ministers whispered behind closed doors about what her success meant. A woman who led armies, kept her oath, and now stood at the center of Parthian power, with more loyalty than most kings. That was the problem. What do you do with a princess more respected than the men in charge? Some wanted her married off, hoping it would limit her influence. Others suggested she be given control over border defenses. But Rhodagun didn't seem interested in rank or politics. She had already proven what she needed to. The battlefield had been her throne. The dust, her crown, her name already carved into the hearts of her soldiers and citizens, needed no royal engraving to last. She didn't need a ceremony. She had already been crowned by history itself. In the months after the campaign, Rhodagun didn't seek attention, but attention followed her anyway. She became the subject of poems, sculptures, stories, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it. Every soldier who served under her returned home with a tale, and each one made her reputation stronger, larger, and harder to challenge. But in the royal halls of Parthia, where politics moved quietly and power shifted behind curtains, her silence was unsettling. She didn't boast. She didn't push for titles. She didn't lobby for land or recognition. Instead, she watched, listened, and understood that the battlefield had only changed. Now it was made of words, not weapons. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother, depending on the tangled royal timeline, had to be cautious. Rhodagun wasn't just admired. She was respected, and not because of her beauty or her birthright, but because of her leadership. She had turned a personal vow into national policy, and her silence into strategy. She didn't say what she planned next. Maybe she didn't know herself. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting or commanding. She was still, and that stillness made people uneasy. What does a woman who conquered without a crown do next? One theory among historians is that Rhodagun used silence as a tool. Her presence alone made others think twice. A single glance or nod from her could influence decisions. Officials hesitated to propose foolish laws. Generals delayed campaigns, hoping for her opinion. Her quiet wasn't inaction, it was control. She had learned that sometimes saying nothing could speak the loudest thought, so she stayed a living legend, moving through the palace. Her hair, freshly washed and braided with memory, was now part of her story. Her presence itself questioned the old ways. She had shown that Parthian strength didn't have to be male. It could ride into war with tangled hair and return with cities surrendered, and all she had to do now was wait. Because sometimes the most powerful move is no move at all. Asterisk. As the years passed, Rhodagun's name began to fade from official records. Parthian scribes, more interested in kings and dynasties than warrior princesses, began to downplay her campaign. The silence she had used so effectively became the excuse to leave her out. No grand mausoleum was built for her. No official epic poem carried her name in golden ink. But here's the truth about real legends. They don't need permission to endure. In the outposts where her army once marched, in the villages she spared, her name remained. Mothers told their daughters her story not as myth, but as a reminder. Never underestimate a woman with purpose. Soldiers remembered her tactics like sacred teachings. Rebels, even decades later, spoke of her as if she might return, rising from the dust, her hair flying like a war flag. There's something deeply unsettling about someone who breaks every rule and still wins. Rhodagun wasn't content to be decoration. She didn't play music, paint birds, or quietly fade into the background. She lived like a flame and disappeared just as quickly. Historians still debate what happened to her. Some believe she retired to a quiet life. Others think she became a shadow advisor, shaping strategy from behind the scenes. A few romantics say she rode out one last time to settle a dispute and was never seen again. No one knows for sure. But one thing is certain, her legacy lived on where it mattered. Among the people. She may not have worn a crown, but she ruled in ways no jewel ever could. She redefined loyalty. She proved that a vow as unusual as refusing to comb your hair could carry the same weight as a royal decree, and be even more inspiring. And though official histories may reduce her to a footnote, the dust of Parthia still remembers her. Because to be eternal, you don't need a statue. You just need to keep your promise and win. Asterisk. She is immortal, not like kings remembered in stories, but like forces of nature. She didn't need to conquer distant lands or sign historic treaties. What she conquered was expectation. In a world where women were told to stay behind curtains while men spilled blood in their name, Rhodagun tore the curtain down and stepped out barefoot, helmet in hand. She didn't request power. She claimed it, and the empire didn't collapse, followed. More importantly, she taught her people something no law could enforce, that loyalty isn't born from fear, but from seeing your leader endure with you, from watching them choose duty over ease, from watching them keep a promise longer than anyone believed possible. She wasn't flawless, no legend is, but her story lasted precisely because it wasn't neat or perfect. It was rough, tangled, and real, like her hair on that final day of victory. In that dirt was dignity. In that vow, a vision of leadership stronger than any crown. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the cause more than in appearances. And that's the part history couldn't erase. Even now, long after Parthia has turned to dust, her name reappears in moments of defiance. Artists bring her back. Writers search for her trail. A vow not to wash until victory. It sounds odd to some, but to those who've had to fight through injustice, it makes sense. Rhodagun was never about beauty. She was about resilience. And in the end, it wasn't gold that crowned her, but dust. The same dust emperors try to avoid in death, yet the same dust she wore with pride. She was forgotten by kings, left out by chroniclers, but remembered by the dust. And that's where true legends live, not in marble, but in the earth. Before empires clashed and the ground ran red with blood, before kings feared her name, Tamiris was simply a daughter of the wind. Born on the open steppe, her homeland was not filled with marble buildings or famous philosophers, was harsh, free, and endless. This was the world of the Massagetaf, nomadic horse archers who rode like spirits of the plains. Their lives were built on survival, honor, and war. We know little of Tamiris's childhood, but we can guess its rhythm. She likely learned to ride before she could walk, well, to shoot before speaking in full sentences. Among the Massagetaf girls weren't hidden in tents or silenced. They trained beside the boys, rode with the warriors, and grew up with iron in their blood. To lead, one had to bleed. And even as a young woman, she did. Her people worshipped the sun and sky, lived off their herds, and buried their dead with weapons, ready to fight even after death. They had no cities, no grand temples, but they had pride. And when enemies came, they didn't answer with prayers, but with arrows. Tamiris likely rose to power after her husband's death. He may have ruled before her, but one thing is clear. She didn't simply inherit leadership, she took it. In a time when most women were treated as property, Tamiris led an army. She negotiated with kings. She spoke as an equal, and if they refused to listen, she made them. She was more than a queen. She was Shahat, the steppes answer to a final move. A war leader clad in bronze and leather, soon to face the most powerful empire on earth. But power, especially for a woman, rarely comes without challenge. As Tamiris secured her rule, whispers spread. South of the mountains, a king was watching. His name was Cyrus the Great, and he wanted more. The scene was set. The wind blew across the plains, and Tamiris, daughter of warriors, would soon ride into history. While Tamiris ruled the open steppes, a very different power was growing to the south, structured, organized, relentless. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, had already conquered Lydia to the west and Babylon to the south. His flags flew over deserts, mountains, and cities where new languages were heard every few days. But Cyrus wasn't finished. He was an empire builder, and every builder eventually looks to the horizon. To him, the Massagetaf weren't wealthy in gold or cities, but they controlled the northeastern frontierland, resources, and trade routes that mattered. More than that, they had something empires feared: pride. And Cyrus believed pride could be bent or broken. But he also knew that brute force wasn't always the best opening move. Known for his strategy, diplomacy, and cleverness, he tried a different path, one used by kings before him to remove threats. Without violence, he proposed marriage. According to ancient sources, especially Herodotus, Cyrus sent envoys to Tamiris with an offer of alliance through matrimony. On paper, it looked like a royal match, the mighty Persian king and the warrior queen of the Massagetaf. But Tamiris wasn't fooled. She saw it for what it was, a political move meant to absorb her people without a fight. She refused. The rejection didn't go over well in the royal courts of Persepolis. With diplomacy over, Cyrus turned to war. He ordered his army to cross the Araxes River, the natural boundary between Persia and Massagetaf territory. He planned to take what Tamiris wouldn't give. But Tamiris was ready. She knew the land. She knew how her people fought in horseback, quick and fierce. And she knew that Cyrus wasn't just after land. He wanted to defeat a woman who had said no. The most powerful king in the world had declared war, but he had no idea what force he had just challenged. Cyrus, the great strategist, conqueror, builder, believed he could outsmart her. He had beaten kings, taken cities, and ruled over many nations. To him, the Massagetaf were wild nomads with fast horses and no cities to protect. What he didn't know was that he was walking into a trap, set by someone just as clever and far more furious. After rejecting his marriage proposal, Tamiris had sent a warning: cross the Araxes, and you'll regret it. Cyrus crossed anyway, building a bridge of boats to carry his troops into Massagetaf land. But instead of launching an attack, Tamiris pulled her forces back, drawing Cyrus deeper into unknown territory. The Persians found an abandoned camp filled with supplies and wine, a luxury for the nomadic Massagetæ. It was bait, and Cyrus took it, lightly thinking his enemies had panicked. He left a portion of his army under General Harpagus to hold the camp, but that night, the Massagetæ returned, striking hard and fast. The battle was swift and brutal. Among the dead was Spagapisus, Tamiris's son and a key commander. Accounts vary. Some say Spagapisus was captured and chose death over humiliation. Others say he died fighting. But all agree, when Tamiris learned of his death, her sorrow turned into something sharper. Her grief became steel. And her next message to Cyrus wasn't a warning. It was a promise. "You may be a glutton for blood," she said, "but I swear I will give you your fill." She promised to make the ground run red with Persian blood, and her revenge would not be quiet. Cyrus had taken her son. He had invaded her land. Now, he would not face a queen, but the mother of a fallen warrior, and she would be the last face he ever saw. The next battle would not be a clash. It would be an execution. The sun rose over the plains, sharp and blinding like a blade. Tamiris stood at the front of her army, not just a queen now, but a storm in human form. Her warriors, shaped by nomadic life, painted their faces with ash and fury. This wasn't politics anymore, it was personal. Despite all his power, Cyrus had underestimated the He assumed they would fight like the other tribes he had defeated and organized, and easy to overwhelm. But Tamiris had spent her life among warriors. She knew how to strike with accuracy, not chaos. She prepared her forces for a full assault on the Persian army. This time, she held nothing back. The location of the final battle is unknown, lost in the vastness of the steppe. But what is clear is that Tamiris launched a fierce counterattack. Her cavalry swept across the plains like a wave of blades, firing arrows from horseback, closing in with axes, and fighting like people with nothing left to lose. The Persians, experienced and disciplined, weren't prepared for such focused rage. Tamiris didn't just command, she fought among them. Her presence on the battlefield inspired her warriors. Every strike carried the weight of loss. Every charge responded to her son's death. Cyrus tried to maintain order, but the line broke. The Persians were overwhelmed. Many were killed on the spot. Others fled into the grasslands, only to be hunted down. And Cyrus the Great, the man who had taken Babylon, Lydia, and nearly the entire known world, fell. Whether he was killed in the fighting or taken and executed varies by account, but the result was the same. He died on Tamiris's terms. What followed became infamous. According to Herodotus, Tamiris found Cyrus's body, ordered his head removed, and in a final act of revenge, submerged it in a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she said, "of the blood you thirsted for." Whether historical fact or symbolic storytelling, the message was clear and lasting. Tamiris would not be conquered. When the dust settled and the plains soaked in the blood of an empire, Tamiris stood victorious, a warrior queen who had done what no king before her had. She brought down Cyrus the Great. The news spread fast. The once unstoppable Achaemenid Empire had been defeated by a woman from the steppe. Persians tried to downplay the loss. But the death of their founder couldn't be hidden. Cyrus's body was eventually brought back and buried with honor in the royal tomb at Pasargadae. Yet the defeat marked a lasting scar on the empire's legacy. For Tamiris and the Massagetæ, the win was more than revenge, it was a statement. They had defended their independence, not just with weapons, but with respect. Tamiris had stood against the most powerful ruler of her time and won. Afterward, she disappeared from the historical record. We have no details about her final years, her death, or who followed her. It's as if, after claiming her justice, she returned to the steppe and let the wind carry her name forward. In the centuries that followed, historians and poets tried to complete her story, turning her into a symbol. To the Persians, she was a bitter memory. To the Greeks, she was a contradictioner, so-called barbarian who showed more honor than many kings, and to the peoples of Central Asia, she became a legend, a ghostly queen who who rides across the plains, fierce and unyielding, her sword remembering every fight. Her image appeared in many forms. Medieval manuscripts showed her in noble armor. Renaissance artists painted her towering over Cyrus's body. Across eras, she became what people needed: an avenger, a wild queen, a lesson, or a symbol of strength. But one thing remains true: she made history. Tamiris didn't inherit power. She earned it through fire and battle. And for one unforgettable moment, the Queen of the Steppe proved that not all empires rise, some fall beneath the hooves of warriors. Driven by vengeance. Most of what we know about Tamiris doesn't come from her own people. The Massagetes left no written records, no stone inscriptions or official archives. What we have comes from a Greek Herodotus, often called the father of history. Writing a century after her life, he recorded Tamiris's story in his work, portraying her as a queen of intense strength and relentless vengeance. But Herodotus was not just a recorder of events. He was a storyteller, part historian, part moralist. To him and his Greek audience, Tamiris represented the fall of arrogance. Cyrus the Great, who had ruled half the known world, was not defeated by another king but by a mother fighting for her son. Her victory took on mythical proportions, and Herodotus shaped it that way. He described the revenge scene in detail: the wineskin of blood, the severed head, and her final words, "Drink your fill." Was it accurate? Historians debate it. Some believe Herodotus exaggerated or created parts of the tale to send a message to his readers, especially those wary of the still powerful Persian Empire. Others think the dramatic moment may be symbolic, but that the death of Cyrus at Tamiris's hands likely happened. There is also the matter of perspective. Herodotus often viewed foreign cultures through a Greek lens. He depicted them as wild yet noble outsiders who reflected Greek ideals of freedom and courage. Tamiris, in that view, wasn't just a foreign queen. She was a moral challenge to Persian ambition. Even if details blurred with time, Herodotus achieved one thing. He made sure Tamiris would be remembered. Because of his writing, she became more than a name in a forgotten battle. She entered legenda's space, where facts may fade, but impact remains. And in that space, between truth and tale, her story found a kind of lasting presence in a world of kings and conquerors. Herodotus introduced a queen who refused to kneel and left her enemies fallen in the dust, though she may have defeated one of the ancient world's most powerful emperors. Tamiris never ruled an empire herself. She didn't build cities, carve laws into stone, or commission golden monuments. Her people, the Massagetes, were nomads. They lived not behind walls, but by the sky, the land, and the horse. That's why Tamiris's legacy was never formalized. No statues, no coins, no official documents remain. Instead, her story was passed down the old way through songs, fireside tales, and the memories of those who followed her. The Massagetes were one of many fierce tribes of Central Asia. Their relatives were the Scythians, the Saka, and the Dehe-skilled horse archers who lived between the Caspian Sea and ancient China. These groups were feared by empires for their speed, unpredictability, and strength. Tamiris, as a female leader, stood out, but she wasn't the only one. Steppe cultures, unlike many settled societies, gave women more freedom. Women rode, hunted, fought, and sometimes led. Archaeological finds confirm this. Graves of Scythian women buried with weapons, armor, and horse gear support the idea of warrior queens being more than just legend. Tamiris was the highest example of that tradition. Her power came not from birthright or divine right, but from ability. She was respected, capable, and unified her people in a harsh environment where survival meant riding faster, shooting straighter, and fearing nothing. But because the Messiah left no permanent structures, Tamiris became a shadow known only through outsiders' words and the oral memory of her people. To Persian historians, she was a warning. To Greeks, a marvel. And to her own people, she was likely a name carried in songs and family lines, a ghost who rode with them on the wind. Empires may rise and fall in stone, but steppe stories ride the air. And Tamiris, grieving, fierce, an undefeated the voice of that wind. Centuries passed. The empires that once surrounded the Massagetes rose and fell. Cyrus's descendants built Persepolis, fought Alexander the Great, and eventually faded into history. But her legend stayed alive, not in palaces, but in the hearts of those who resisted. Across Central Asia, she became more than a queen. She became a symbol of strength, of resistance, of the free and wild spirit of the steppe. In many ways, Tamiris represented a kind of defiance that crossed borders and time. She wasn't Roman, Greek, or Persian. Her story belonged to no empire, and that made her both dangerous and unforgettable. In the medieval Islamic world, her name still appeared, shaped by new languages, but never fully erased. She was praised for her sense of justice and her drive for revenge. In other accounts, she was seen as a savage queen, a reminder that power in the hands of a woman could be both admirable and unsettling. By the Renaissance, European artists rediscovered her story through the writings of Herodotus. Painters showed her in elaborate armor, standing triumphantly over Cyrus's lifeless body. In one dramatic image, she lifts his severed head like a trophy, bloody and victorious. The scene was theatrical, but also political. These artists were fascinated by a woman who didn't just survive in a male-dominated world. She won. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Tamiris became a national symbol in regions such as Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Poets and scholars reclaimed her as a historic figure, proof that Central Asian identity was strong, proud, and deeply connected to women. Her name appeared in textbooks, on statues, and in military events. A woman who once ruled on horseback with a bow was now riding again, this time through memory, pride, and national identity. Asterisk in today's world, where the idea of powerful women still faces resistance, Tamiris remains a challenge. She wasn't perfect or gentle. She was firm, and when needed, harsh. She showed compassion only to those who earned it. She represented resistance, and the blood of an empire on her hands became a crown she wore without regret. History often remembers those who built monuments, wrote laws, or ruled with titles etched in stone. Tamiris did none of these. She left behind no empire, palace, or official records, and yet her name endures not because she ruled forever, but because she refused to be forgotten. She stands as a reminder that history can remember women not just as supporters or side characters, but as decisive leaders. Tamiris didn't ask for recognition. She claimed it through battle. She didn't follow behind a king. She rode out to face one and won. Her story is taught in schools from Central Asia to Europe, not just because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she stood up to him. She wasn't defending an empire. She was protecting freedom, a freedom that lived in open landscapes, hunted with falcons, and rested beneath the stars. A kind of freedom that couldn't be drawn on a map. Today, her statues rise in the capital cities of Kazakhstan. Her image is printed on coins and appears in textbooks. To modern Central Asians, she is seen as a founding figure, a connection to a past before Islam, before the Soviet era, and proudly shaped by nomadic traditions. A reminder that their identity came not from submission, but from the cry of war and the gallop of horses. In a world still shaped by struggles over power, gender, and memory, Tamiris remains a powerful figure, not just because she defeated a king, but because she taught a greater lesson, that dignity is not given, it is claimed. That leadership can also look like a grieving mother who refuses to let her son's killer walk away. We often wonder why some names survive while others fade. Tamiris endured because she was unforgettable. In a time when women were expected to remain hidden in the background, she stepped forwards, sword in hand, fire in her heart, and carved her name into history. Empires collapse, statues fall, but legends continue. And somewhere, in the wind across the steppe, a queen still rides, undefeated, unchanged, and unforgettable. In ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't just a hobby. It was an organized science, supported by the state, and approved by religious practice. Long before modern beekeeping, Egyptians had already created a mobile, structured system for managing bees and collecting honey. By around 2400 BCE, beekeeping was already depicted in detailed scenes on the walls of tombs in the sunlit nook of Saqqara. It wasn't only about harvesting honey, it was a sacred task, closely connected to farming, healing, religion, and beliefs about the afterlife. Egyptians used horizontal clay tube hives, usually placed in rows and laid on their sides. These hives didn't look like today's wooden boxes. They resembled terracotta drain pipes, carefully designed to be moved seasonally as the Nile's floodwaters pulled back and flowers bloomed. The hives were relocated up and down the river to follow where nectar was most available. This system, known as transhumance, was highly advanced for its time, almost like ancient GPS for bees. Beekeepers used clay or stone tubes to blow smoke into the hives, calming the bees before collecting honey. Without protective gear, they relied on skill, timing, and courage. Honeycombs were carefully removed, and the honey was collected not only for eating but for healing, embalming, and religious ceremonies. Honey was considered a sacred gift, tied to the gods, especially Ra, the sun god. In Egyptian mythology, bees were believed to have come from the tears of Ra as they fell to the earth. This wasn't just symbolic, it influenced how bees were treated as messengers between humans and the divine. Honey was offered in temples, used in funerals, and even served as a form of trade currency. It also played a key role in medicine. Ancient papyri mention honey in more than 500 medical recipes, mixed with herbs, wine, or milk to treat wounds, infections, and stomach issues. Its healing properties were well understood, even if the science behind them wasn't. Beeswax, too, was collected and used in cosmetics, embalming, and even in writing tablets. It had value far beyond the hive, becoming part of daily life for scribes, priests, and healers. In Egypt, the hive wasn't just a source of sweetness, it symbolized balance, healing, and cosmic order, carefully maintained under the watch of both humans and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and spiritual meaning, ancient Mesopotamia contributed something equally important: laws. Often called the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia not only mastered irrigation, writing, and city building, but also recognized the worth of honey and the need to protect its production. Though Mesopotamian beekeeping isn't as visibly documented as in Egyptian tombs, evidence appears in cuneiform tablets and legal codes, pointing to a quiet but advanced practice. References to bees and honey date back to the Sumerian period, and Akkadian and Babylonian texts mention Ninsbe gardens or apiaries, usually tied to temples or royal estates. This suggests honey was a controlled resource used in offerings, medicine, food, and trade. Losing a hive could be a serious economic loss. One of the most revealing sources is the Code of Hammurabi, written around 1754 BCE. While it mainly addresses theft, injury, and farming, a few lines specifically cover bee-related issues. If someone allowed their bees to swarm into another man's land and damage crops, they were held responsible. If honey was stolen, compensation had to be made, sometimes in silver or in jars of replacement honey. In a society where most things were measured in grain, the fact that honey had legal protection is significant. Mesopotamians also viewed bees as more than just insects. Some texts called them divine messengers, even linking them to Ninurta, the god of farming and war. Beeswax was especially valued for sealing documents and making ritual objects. It was both practical and mystical, used in both government and religious ceremonies. While the exact shape of their hives isn't fully known, scholars believe they used mud brick or basket-style hives, similar to those in early Levantine regions. These were likely placed in shaded gardens or rooftops to protect them from the summer heat. Beekeeping in Mesopotamia focused less on worship and more on structure, regulating resources, ensuring fairness, and maintaining economic order. The hive wasn't just a natural system, it mirrored society's need for law, balance, and control. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, before Greek civilization took center stage, The Hittites had already developed a unique approach to beekeeping. For them, bees were sacred symbols of purity and messengers between worlds, central to farming and spiritual life. Unlike the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, who combined science and economy in their practices, the Hittites emphasized ritual. Religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE mentioned bees not only as honey producers, but as participants in purification ceremonies. In one famous ritual, a bee is summoned to carry away impurity, divine anger, and evil. Then it is released, hummed an unusual show of respect that reflects their deep reverence for bees. The Hittites valued honey for its taste and its spiritual uses. It was part of offerings, cleansing rituals, and anointing ceremonies, often mixed with wine, milk, or grain. Honey wasn't just consumed, it was burned, poured, and blessed. It acted as a bridge between human prayer and divine response. Archaeological evidence suggests the Hittites used clay or woven hives kept near temples or palaces. Though records are limited, comparisons with neighboring traditions indicate that portable, tube-like hives made from straw and mud were likely used similar to Egyptian methods. Beekeepers probably worked under temple authority, and their duties were closely tied to religious festivals and state events. For the Hittites, honey wasn't just a product, it was a sacred substance used for healing, diplomacy, and worship. The Hittites also made an important contribution to understanding bees. Surviving texts describe bee migration patterns and link blooming seasons with honey production, showing their careful observation of nature. In Anatolia, the sound of the hive wasn't background noise. It was a sacred rhythm felt by both gods and kings. The ancient Greeks didn't just study bees, they admired them, feared them, and used them as a model for society. To the Greeks, the hive wasn't just a place for honey. It symbolized the ideal city, a representation of divine order, and a source of scientific interest. Greek beekeepers improved apiculture through both practical skills and philosophical insight. Unlike earlier civilizations that used fixed clay hives, the Greeks created movable terracotta hives with removable lids and internal sections. These allowed for honey collection without destroying the colony, an early form of sustainable harvesting. They also developed smoke control techniques using ceramic bellows and clay smokers to calm the bees. This made honey collection safer and protected the hive's structure, enabling multiple harvests in a season. One of the most influential Greek thinkers, Aristotle, studied bees in great detail. In Historia Animalium, he observed that bees had specific roles. Some gathered nectar, others defended the hive, and one, which he mistakenly called the king bee, appeared to lead. Although he got the gender wrong, Aristotle's insights laid the foundation for future research. Honey played an important role in Greek life. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, and flavored cakes. It was also used in medicines, especially in healing wounds. Honey was seen as a divine substance, possibly the main ingredient in ambrosia, the food of the gods. The bee was linked to mythological figures like Artemis and Demeter. Priestesses of Artemis were even called Melissa, meaning bee. For the Greeks, the hive was both a natural system and a spiritual model, proof that even the smallest creatures followed rules, moved with order, and had meaning. In understanding bees, they believed they were learning the laws of nature, and perhaps of the gods. If the Greeks observed bees with fascination, the Romans organized them with ambition. In the Roman Empire, beekeeping grew into a large-scale industry, matching the needs of a vast civilization. From the vineyards of Gaul to the hills of Hispania, Rome expanded the hive into an empire-wide operation. The Romans learned much from the Greeks and Etruscans, but developed beekeeping into a formal science. Writers like Varro and Columella gave detailed advice on building hives, harvesting honey, and managing bee colonies. Their texts reflect a surprisingly modern understanding of seasonal patterns, swarm behavior, and pest management. Roman hives came in various forms: hollow logs, cork or bark containers, clay tubes, and woven baskets sealed with mud or dung. Adaptability was key. In cold regions, hives were better insulated. In warm areas, they needed airflow. This flexibility allowed beekeeping to thrive across the empire. Asterisk to calm bees. Romans used clay pots filled with herbs like thyme or oregano. The smoke eased the bees and may have added a subtle taste to the honey. Harvesting was done with iron knives. Wax was melted and filtered for use in candles, cosmetics, writing tablets, and even waterproofing ships. Honey was everywhere in Roman life. It sweetened wine to make balsam, was used in baking, sauces, and as a quick source of energy for athletes and soldiers. Roman doctors, following Hippocratic traditions, prescribed honey for sore throats, wounds, fevers, and digestion. Its antibacterial qualities were well understood. What set Roman beekeeping apart was its scale and structure. Large estates had their own apiaries, managed by enslaved workers under the supervision of estate managers. Records were kept, and surplus honey was sold or traded. Bees weren't just helpful insects, they were part of the Roman economy. To the Romans, a hive worked like a household, well managed, orderly, and productive. While ancient civilizations raised bees for honey and wax, many also saw the hive as a spiritual doorway. Across Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond, bees weren't just creatures, they were sacred beings moving between worlds. They delivered divine messages and gave gifts like honey, bridging the natural and spiritual. In Egypt, as mentioned earlier, bees were tied directly to creation myths. Ra, the sun god, was believed to have cried tears that became bees when they touched the earth. Honey was placed in temples as offerings to please the gods and accompany sacred rites. It had value beyond the hive, becoming part of daily life for scribes, priests, and healers. In Egypt, the hive was more than just a source of sweetness. It symbolized balance, healing, and cosmic order, carefully maintained under the eyes of both people and gods. While Egypt gave beekeeping structure and spiritual meaning, ancient Mesopotamia added something just as important: laws. Known as the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia not only developed irrigation, writing, and cities, they also saw the need to protect honey production. Although Mesopotamian beekeeping wasn't as visually recorded as Egypt's, evidence exists in cuneiform tablets and legal texts. These suggest a quietly advanced system. Mentions of bees and honey go back to the Sumerians. Akkadian and Babylonian writings refer to nins, or bee gardens, usually found near temples or royal grounds, implying that honey was a controlled, elite product. It was used in offerings, medicine, food, and trade, and losing a hive could cause serious economic loss. A key example appears in the Code of Hammurabi, written around 1754 BCE. While most of the code deals with theft, injury, and farming, a few lines focus on bee-related issues. If someone's bees swarmed into another's land and caused damage, they were held responsible. If honey was stolen, repayment had to be made, sometimes in silver or replacement jars. In a culture where most things were counted in grain, giving honey legal status shows how valuable it was. Mesopotamians also saw bees as more than insects. Some texts describe them as divine messengers and linked them to Ninurta, the god of agriculture and war. Beeswax was important too, used for sealing documents and making ritual objects. It was both practical and symbolic, part of daily life and spiritual practice. Although no full hive designs survived, experts believe they used mudbrick or woven basket hives, similar to early Levantine styles. These were likely kept in shaded gardens or rooftops to protect from the heat. In Mesopotamia, beekeeping focused more on organization, managing resources, maintaining fairness, and supporting the economy. The hive symbolized order and structure in a society that valued both. In Anatolia's highlands, before Greek culture rose, the Hittites were already practicing beekeeping with great care. They didn't see it as just farming. For them, bees were sacred, representing purity and connection between worlds, key to both agriculture and religion. Unlike the Egyptians and Mesopotamians, who blended science and economics, the Hittites focused more on ritual. Religious texts from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE describe bees not only as honeymakers, but also as part of cleansing ceremonies. In one well-known ritual, a bee is called upon to take away impurity, sin, and divine anger. Then, instead of being killed, it is released, a rare act of kindness, showing deep respect for the insect. The Hittites used honey in food, worship, and healing. It appeared in offerings, purification, rituals, and anointing rites mixed with wine, milk, or grain. Honey was not just eaten, it was burned, poured, or blessed. It helped carry prayers to the gods. Evidence suggests they used clay or woven hives kept near temples or royal grounds. Though the archaeological record is thin, comparisons to nearby cultures point to straw or mud hives. Similar to those in Egypt, Hittite beekeepers likely worked under temple authority and were involved in state ceremonies. To them, honey wasn't a simple product, it was sacred, used in healing and diplomacy. The Hittites also made an important observation: bee migration. Some surviving texts describe seasonal bee behavior and link it to flower patterns, showing how closely they watched nature. In Anatolia, the hive's hum was more than sound, it was a sacred rhythm that connected gods and kings alike. The Greeks didn't just keep bees, they admired and studied them. To them, the hive was more than a place of honey. It was a living model of harmony, an ideal for society, and a source of deep curiosity. That Greek beekeepers improved beekeeping by combining hands-on skills with philosophical thought. Unlike earlier cultures using fixed clay hives, the Greeks developed terracotta hives with removable parts. These allowed keepers to collect honey without harming the bees. Step toward modern sustainable harvesting. They also advanced smoke control. Using clay bellows and smokers, they puffed smoke into hives to calm the bees. This made it safer to collect honey and kept the hive healthy for multiple harvests. Aristotle studied bees carefully. In Historia Animalium, he described how bees seemed to have roles. Some gathered nectar, some defended the hive, and one, which he wrongly called a king, appeared to lead. Despite this mistake, his observations became the basis for later bee research. Honey played a big role in Greek culture. It sweetened wine, preserved fruits, flavored cakes, and was used in medicine, especially for healing wounds. Greeks saw honey as a divine food. They believed ambrosia, the food of the gods, was made of honey and wine. Bees were tied to myth too. They were connected to Artemis and Demeter, goddesses of nature and harvest. Priestesses of Artemis were even called Melissa, meaning bees. For the Greeks, the hive was a symbol of order and grace, proof that even small creatures lived with discipline and purpose. In studying bees, they believed they were learning nature's laws and perhaps those of the gods. The Romans didn't just study bees, they organized them. In the Roman Empire, beekeeping became a large-scale operation, meeting the needs of a vast and diverse population. From Gaul to Hispania, Rome turned hives into an agricultural industry. The Romans borrowed knowledge from the Greeks and Etruscans, then expanded it into a detailed science. Writers like Varro and Columella recorded how to build hives, manage bees, and collect honey. Their work showed an early understanding of bee behavior, seasons, and pest control. Roman hives came in many forms: logs, clay tubes, cork, bark, and woven baskets sealed with mud or dung. This variety allowed beekeeping to thrive across climates. In cold areas, hives were insulated. In hot regions, airflow was prioritized to calm bees. Romans burned herbs like thyme or oregano in clay pots. This soothed the bees and may have flavored the honey. Harvesting used iron knives, and wax was melted and strained for candles. Cosmetics, writing, and even ship waterproofing. Honey was widely used. It sweetened wine, enhanced food, and served as an energy source for athletes and soldiers. Roman doctors treated sore throats, wounds, and stomach problems with honey. Its healing power was well known. What set Roman beekeeping apart was its scale. Large estates had their own bee farms, run by enslaved labor under overseers. Records tracked production, and extra honey was sold or traded. Bees were part of the economy viewed as useful and productive. For the Romans, a hive mirrored a well-run home, orderly, efficient, and full of purpose. Across the ancient world, bees were more than insects. They were spiritual messengers. From Egypt to Greece and Mesopotamia, bees symbolized a bridge between worlds, delivering divine gifts like honey, something that connected life and the sacred dot in Egypt. As noted earlier, mythology claimed that Ra's tears became bees when they touched earth. Honey was offered to gods, placed in tombs, and used in rituals to help the dead reach the afterlife. The bee also became a royal symbol. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt bore the title he of the sedge and the bee, linking their power to the hive's harmony. In Greece, bees had strong ties to femininity. Priestesses of Demeter and Artemis were called Melissa, or bees. These women were seen as channels between gods and humans. Some believed the oracle at Delphi was once led by bee priestesses. Even the famous Pythia was sometimes called the Delphic bee. The hive itself was seen as a symbol of perfect order, disciplined, cooperative, and productive. Philosophers compared bee society to an ideal human one. Stoics admired bees for their duty. Later, Christians used bees as symbols of purity and resurrection, noting that they created without desire. In Mesopotamian magic, bees were part of purification rituals. In Hittite ceremonies, bees were released after absorbing sin. Honey and wax were burned in sacred fires, used in amulets, and included in blessing texts. Bees were not just symbols, they were believed to carry spiritual power. To ancient cultures, honey wasn't just sweet, it was sacred. Long before bacteria were understood, people knew honey could heal wounds, ease coughs, and preserve bodies. It felt like magic, but it was science ahead of its time. In Egypt, honey was central to medicine. Texts like the Ebers Papyrus from around 1550 BCE listed in over 500 treatments. It was mixed with milk, figs, garlic, and herbs to treat eye infections, digestion problems, and more. Combined with animal fat or resin, it was used on burns and cuts. Doctors knew honey sped up healing and prevented infection. Thanks to its acidity and hydrogen peroxide content, the Greeks continued this. Hippocrates prescribed honey for coughs, ulcers, and fatigue. He used it with vinegar to make oxymel, a tonic for clearing phlegm and lowering fever. Greek athletes drank honeyed water to recover faster. In India, Ayurvedic medicine valued honey, classifying it by taste and source. Texts warned against overheating it but praised it for treating digestion issues, colds, wounds, and poison. Honey also played a role in religious rituals and fasts. The Romans believed in honey's healing power too. Pliny the Elder listed dozens of uses in natural history, from ointments and laxatives to wound care. Honey, mixed with poppy juice, was used as a sedative. Roman surgeons applied it to reduce swelling and prevent infection. Beeswax was also useful. It served as a base for balms, plasters, and even dental work. Its durability made it ideal for sealing and preserving. In short, honey wasn't just a treat, it was life-saving. It healed, protected, and symbolized purity. It was the pharmacy of the ancient world, delivered by bees. Ancient beekeepers were more than farmers. They were innovators and close observers of nature. Across cultures, they created tools and techniques to manage bees, gather honey, and stay safe from stings. One key advancement was hive design. Egyptians used horizontal clay tubes, durable and portable, resembling natural bee shelters. Greeks and Romans used terracotta and woven baskets, some with removable lids, allowing honey to be collected without destroying the hive. This was a major step toward sustainable farming. To calm bees, ancient keepers used smoke. Greeks invented clay smokers and bellows to direct smoke into hives, hiding alarm signals from guard bees. Romans refined this by burning herbs like thyme to soothe the bees and subtly flavor the honey. Tools included wooden or bronze knives, to cut combs. Sometimes, combs were pressed to extract honey, and wax was melted and filtered. Protective gear was minimal. Keepers relied on timing and skill. Ancient texts show that beekeepers carefully observed bees. They understood swarming, seasonal changes, and even moved hives to follow flowering plants like today's migratory beekeeping. Honey storage was also key. Egyptians used sealed ceramic jars to keep honey fresh, sometimes for centuries. Honey sealed in tombs has been found still edible. Spiritual care also mattered. Rituals were held to please bee spirits or gods, ensuring harmony in the hive. This respect was part of their success. Overall, ancient beekeeping blended science, skill, and respect. Their work laid the foundation for modern apiculture. The early practice of beekeeping shaped our lasting bond with bees. Far from simple farming, it touched medicine, religion, trade, and ecology across civilizations. From the Nile to Anatolia, Greece to Rome, ancient keepers built methods to protect and support bee colonies. Their advances in hive design, smoke, use, and seasonal care made sustainable honey collection possible, vital for survival and trade. Their respect for bee life cycles promoted harmony between humans and nature. Their medical use of honey influenced early healing traditions in Egypt, India, and Rome, practices that still persist. Honey's healing and preserving powers helped shape early medicine, while beeswax found uses in beauty, writing, and building. The spiritual value of bees lives on. Religious ceremonies still include honey, and bees appear in art and myth as symbols of purity, resurrection, and order. Migratory beekeeping, once ancient practice, is now essential in modern farming. Today's pollination systems reflect this old knowledge. Despite all our progress, the core truth remains: we depend on bees, and they have shaped our lives for thousands of years. The story of ancient beekeeping shows human creativity, a deep respect for nature, and the lasting power of cooperation both among bees and between species. It reminds us that even the smallest creatures can inspire science, belief, and survival.